Okay, you know your latest idea for product innovation is awesome, but so was your last idea and that went nowhere. Or alternatively, you're constantly struggling to get your colleague or a boss or a direct report to listen to you. If you fall into a category like this, where you think you have great ideas but it goes nowhere, then this video is for you. Because today, we're going to talk about how can you improve your communication in the workplace. And I'm going to give you some really specific tips and points on how you could become the most effective communicator in your place of work. So let's start with number one point, which is you need to assess the workplace communication patterns that seem most successful where you work. So in this kind of post-COVID world, one of the things that I have learned is that the way people are getting things done has changed. And it's also really variable by workplace. So what I often will say to someone I'm working with is, look around. How do things get done here? Do people write formal memos? I see this a lot, for example, still in law firms. Do people make decisions in informal meetings around coffee tables? I think that probably happened a lot during COVID and maybe a lot less now. Does it happen more in a one-on-one conversation or over text? Once you've done this, you need to master that communication form. Don't fight it. If people are using memos, you need to become a great memo writer. If people are using text, you need to become good at text, not say, this doesn't work here. I was doing some work with this client that for lack of a better phrase, I'm going to call my You're So 2010 client. But they would spend a huge amount of time putting together an elaborate proposal with a really fancy PowerPoint and an explanation to back it up at a weekly meeting. And I gotta say, they were good at the PowerPoint, but they weren't making any headway. And they were super frustrated because they were working really hard. But once I talked to them a little bit more, right, what I learned is that between 2010 and now, everyone at this company was communicating almost exclusively through Slack. And so what would happen is during the week, there'd be a whole bunch of back and forth exchange. My client wasn't involved in that exchange. Why? Because my client was putting together an amazing PowerPoint deck. But by the time the meeting came and by the time the PowerPoint deck was prepared and presented, basically folks had already solidified on some different idea that had been talked about and chewed over on Slack. And so my poor client's ideas were just thrown away or stewed. So as frustrating, as hard as it was for my client, it was like, you are good at PowerPoint, and good news for you, right? People still use PowerPoint in a lot of context, but they ain't using it where you're working, so you need to master Slack instead. Okay, second involves preparation. One of the key lessons that I have learned is that experts, whether they are a lawyer or an economist or a scientist, they typically spend a lot of time preparing their substantive work, right? Lawyers will spend hours, weeks and weeks writing a legal brief. If you're in the advertising world, you spend a lot of time on an advertising strategy. If you're an academic, you probably spend a lot of time coming up with a research agenda and writing your papers. So here's what people tend not to do. Spend a lot of time preparing how to sell it. And what I want to say is if you want to be effective in negotiation, if you want to be effective in communication at work, you need to think about not just the product, not just the thing you're working on, but also how do you communicate that? How do you sell it to the people you're trying to persuade? Roger Fisher, who founded the Harvard Negotiation Project and was really one of the most successful negotiators I know, would often say the problem is not coming up with a solution. The problem is coming up with a way to get people to that solution. And so to that end, I'm not saying don't do your very best substantive work. We need that. But then you want to spend some time thinking about who is coming to this particular meeting. Who are the decision makers? What do the decision makers care about? To whom do decision makers defer in this room? And how do I influence them? So essentially what I'm saying here is you need to have your substantive product, but then you need to have your negotiation strategy, and you need to spend a lot of time on that. Third, you need to listen in order to frame your case in ways that will appeal to others' needs. So we often think communication is about talking, and talking is a piece of communication, but it's also really about listening. And we're listening for a very specific reason. The more we can learn about those we need to influence, the more we can frame our arguments, frame our case in ways that appeal to their interests. So one of the people that I always thought was incredibly good at this was a former dean of Harvard Law School who's now a Supreme Court Justice, Elena Kagan. One of the things I would observe when I was on the faculty at Harvard Law School and she was the dean is that she had a tremendous ability to convene meetings and listen to other faculty members and to other students and ask really good questions so that she understood where other people's minds were at, what they tended to be influenced by. And that enabled her then to craft a bunch of policy decisions that needed, for example, maybe a faculty vote or needed perhaps the student body to say yes to in ways that made the student body want to say yes or made the faculty want to say yes. And this communication strategy, right, was very effective during her time as dean. And although I don't have any insider knowledge on this, I'm pretty persuaded that there have been at least some Supreme Court cases where her ability to listen really well has been influential with some of the justices on the Supreme Court. So let's review. In order to be successful in the workplace, you gotta be good at what you do, but you also gotta be good at communicating. And there are 3 key ways to do that. First, assess the workplace communication patterns in your own place of work, and then master them, whatever they are. 2, prepare in advance. You obviously want the substantive work you do to be top rate, but you also need to think about how do I influence and communicate with the people who are the decision makers here, and coming up with a strategy that makes it yesable for them is really important. 3, listen for the purpose of framing your case in ways that appeal to others' needs. So, if you want to continue to learn how to improve in skills of communication, negotiation, and mediation, watch this next video which talks about the steps in the mediation process. Also, if you want to improve in your negotiation and mediation skills, I offer courses through the Cambridge Negotiation Institute. Please reach out to me. Finally, I'd be super grateful if you would subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and ring the bell. Thanks for watching. I'm Bob Bordone. Okay, you know you want to learn how to be a better mediator. Keep watching.